Hello and a very warm welcome. To kickstart our coverage of the World Economic Forum here at Davos, I've got a very special guest, the man who's bringing this entire show together, the president of the World Economic Forum, Borge Brende, joins us. Thank you so much for giving us time. There's a lot of talk, climate activists upset that it's feeling like spring, it's no longer cold, and climate crisis is the biggest challenge. Well, it seems Davos is back just the way it should be.
Yeah, there is a lot of snow, so thank you for inviting me on your show.
It's great to have you with us, and thank you for taking our time. I want to start by asking you about the broad theme of Davos. We're basically talking about cooperation in a fragmented world. Many would say that given what's happened between the pandemic and now, with the growing differences between the United States and the Western world on the one side, China and Russia on the other, this is becoming more and more difficult to achieve.
It is true that the backdrop that this meeting is happening against is more complicated geopolitically and geoeconomic in decades. It doesn't necessarily look good, but there are also some silver linings. For example, economy in India is growing quite substantially. It's now the fastest growing of the big economies in the world. We're also seeing that inflation is coming down in France, Germany, and the US. And hopefully China will grow again quite substantially towards the end of this year.
There was a lot of talk about the certainty of recession, which now seems to be moderating from a certain recession to a fall in growth and possibly a mild recession. Given all the people that you're speaking to in the build-up to this big annual conclave, what's your sense about the overall economic picture as you're reading it?
So I still think the global economy will grow this year. There can be some countries that now run into a recession where the economy is contracting. But if we now see interest going down, more investments, we are also seeing that there are no further fragmentation of the global economy. I think we will come through this year with growth, and hopefully next year we will see some additional growth. But we're not out of the woods yet. It could be also that we see a recession, hopefully a shallow one. But what we really have to avoid is that we repeat the 70s. Then we had a full decade of low growth.
When we'd met in Delhi a few months ago, you'd made an announcement saying that this year would be much worse than the last. Is that something that you're still standing by, or given the fact that China has opened up with the way that it has, the commodity market in China and elsewhere is showing signs of traction, that maybe the worst case scenario won't play itself out?
So the economy, I think, is going to grow slower this year than compared to last year. But we also have the geopolitics. The geopolitics does not look better this year. It really looks quite challenging. The Ukraine war is still going on. You also have no competition between the EU and the US about level playing field. The EU feels that the US, through this Inflation Reduction Act, are subsidizing its industries. We see that there are also tensions on the Indian-Chinese border, not talking about the situation in East Asia with the China Sea, where we see that Japan is now spending more money on the military, and there are tensions there too.
So let's spend some time on China. We know that a senior politician from Xi's team is coming to China the first time they're traveling after the pandemic. What's the level of engagement WEF has with China, given that they're trying to open up and there are some signs of possible moderation in some of the hardline positions that the Xi administration took over the last 2 years?
So we do hope for a rapprochement between China and the US. We saw it already at the G20 meeting in Bali, where they agreed to then again start discussions on climate. Maybe there are other things also happening. We will have Vice Premier Li He here. He is in charge of the economic dialogue with the US, but also the trade dialogue. So let's see if there can be some progress there. What we have to avoid, and I think this is also incredibly important for the G20 presidency of India, is to avoid new trade wars, new trade tariffs, because that definitely will make a recovery even more difficult.
Because of the manner in which the pandemic is spreading through the mass of China at this moment, are you seeing a new short-term pragmatism from Beijing, where a lot of the hardline positions that were being taken are now being moderated? Do you see this as a deeper change or just as a temporary reset because of their own domestic problems?
So the result of the lifting of the COVID measures will lead to more growth at the end of the year. It will possibly also lead to China starting to export deflation again, because they were exporting lower prices for decades. We will hear from Li He in Davos on Tuesday if there are no also signals that there will be new reforms when it comes to capital market and other internal reforms. We'll also see if there is real appetite among the US and China to then reconcile on some of the trade issues. I think it is a fact that, for example, 10% of the trade in the past, they will decouple. If it's national security related to it, I don't think they will continue to trade with each other. But that leaves still 90% of the areas where it's possible to trade. So that's the new reality, more nearshoring, more friendshoring, but not all over. It's on those technical security related issues, semiconductors, maybe some minerals, and etc. And there, of course, this is raising challenges also for other nations that end in the middle of this.
A lot of companies are now talking about a China plus one supply chain. You spoke of friendshoring. The big hope in India is that some of this realignment will see new manufacturing come to India. We're seeing that to some extent with Apple and a few other big marquee brands. What's your reading of the possibility of this realignment benefiting India?
So we are seeing that there is some nearshoring and friendshoring driven by American companies and the American position. We see a lot of investments in Mexico now. We also see things moving to Vietnam, also to Thailand. And I think you're right that we also see growth in manufacturing in India. Overall, though, the growth in India is quite impressive. Last time we met in Delhi, I said it was good to come from Europe to Delhi to feel what optimism felt again.
Yeah.
Like.
No, and that's true. And what's your sense of the India delegation here at the World Economic Forum this year and the level of engagement between the Indian ministers, corporates, technocrats with not just people at WEF, but all those delegates participating from across the world?
There's a huge interest related to India here in Davos, that's for sure. We're very pleased that we have 4 cabinet ministers here in Davos that also work very closely with Prime Minister Modi. We have meetings called Country Strategy Dialogues where CEOs can sign up and then meet with the ministers. The one that is we have seen the most sign up to, I think it's like 100 CEOs now, is the Indian one. And I think this is also an indication there is like really, really a lot of interest related to India.
That's interesting that you mentioned it because while a lot of the other countries are sending their delegates, it seems that India does believe very strongly in the WEF story, and there's a lot of high-level participation happening from the Indian industry and Indian corporate sector.
Yeah, that's true. We have unparalleled participation from India on the business side this year, but also a lot of start-up and more, I would say, also unicorns. Because during the pandemics, there were like 100 new unicorns in India, and all those are now knocking on our door. That's very exciting.
When we met for the last World Economic Forum in summer, there's a lot of talk about Ukraine and Russia. The war still goes on. There's now a sense of dreariness about how long it goes on for, when it ends in one form and shape. Where is Ukraine on the WEF agenda at this moment? What are you hoping or realistically thinking might happen next there in the war?
I think the key there is with Mr. Putin. If he then decides to start complying with international law again, things can change. But so far we see continuation of attacks on civilians, women, children. So we don't see any way of breaking that impasse for the time being. And the Ukrainians are fighting very, very hard. And what has Mr. Putin achieved? We see now a dramatic increase in the military expanding in Europe. We see 2 new European countries joining NATO, Sweden, Finland. we also see that Europe is shifting very fast from depending on Russian gas to now being energy independent. And with freedom fuels, as they call it, I heard, with the renewables and all this. So I don't think that Kremlin is in the best mood based on this, but the war is continuing at a high cost, that's for sure.
The Russian perspective, if you read the writing in Moscow, is that, hey, Western sanctions haven't hurt us so badly. They thought they'll shut our economy down through the sanctions that the United States imposed on us. We seem to be doing fine. We're surviving, and yes, we have appetite. The world will get bored of this war and start getting fatigued, but we are here for the long run.
I think what President Putin planned was that he was going to take Kiev in a week. That didn't happen. Quite the contrary, areas where they have annexed, said this is Russian territory, is retaken by the Ukrainians. I don't think that was part of the playbook. We're also very concerned about the Russian economy. It's true because the extraordinary prices of oil and gas, the Russian economy has been not doing that badly, but now we see it's contracting. It is not really doing well, and we see that the most talented young men are now fleeing to Kazakhstan, to Serbia, and others. So I hope that we will see an end to this war. Also, that will, of course, benefit the Russian people.
There was a lot of murmuring initially about India continuing to buy oil from Russia through all the public statements of the Indian government. Do you think India has been able to explain its position enough internationally, so much so that it isn't a cause of concern any longer?
So the World Economic Forum is not taking a stand on this. I also heard Foreign Minister explain these positions. I don't think there is any major concerns in the world around India. India has to make its own decisions, but we also know that India, for example, is relying a lot on Russian military equipment from the past. I think almost 85% are the source from Russia, and I think India is also now moving away from that a lot. So you can say that India is buying oil and gas, but when it comes to buying, for example, military equipment from Russia, I think they're pivoting very much towards the U.S. and other nations. So it's a mixed picture.
I want to thank you. You've got a very packed schedule, so let me not hold you back. It's continuing to snow and snowing non-stop. So any concern about, this feeling like spring? It doesn't feel like spring. Maybe for you, you come from Norway, it might.
No, this is also quite heavy snowing in Norway.
Okay, great. So. Thank you very much. I wish you a good forum and all the very best. Thank you.
Welcome back in the snow.
Thank you so much. Thank you.